So, a very good day to one and all. I am Dr. Rohit Gopinath, and today I'll be talking about a very important pediatric surgical topic, which is congenital choledochal malformations. So, congenital choledochal malformations, even though it's very common in the pediatric age group, seems to have its effects which last even far into adulthood as well. So, proceeding into this topic. So, you find that all of you must be very familiar with the terminology choledochal cyst. But we find that this terminology choledochal cyst is no longer used. It has instead been replaced by the terminology choledochal malformation. So, the terminology, the terminology cyst, find that it denotes more of a spherical structure or a spherical abnormality involving the choledochus or the biliary tree. So, you find that it does not seem to do justice to the other variety or other range of malformations or other range of abnormalities that we see in the spectrum of disease called choledochal malformation. You find that you can have a fusiform dilatation. We can have a dilatation purely involving only the intrahepatic biliary radicle. You can have a dilatation involving the intraduodenal component of it. So, you find that all these do not seem to be represented adequately by the terminology choledochal cyst, and hence has been replaced by the terminology choledochal malformation. So, it is only right that we call it congenital choledochal malformation. So, you find that like any other condition that we have in pediatric surgery, most of the incidences are unknown, possibly because of lack of data from some of the countries, some of the parts of the world. But what information we do have denotes that there is a higher incidence among the Asian population when compared to the Western population. You find that there is a very high incidence of such choledochal malformations in Japan, followed by China, Vietnam, etc. In which areas? In these areas, the incidence is found to be about 1 in 13,000. And in Western literature, it has been reported that has an incidence of approximately 1 in 1 lakh. There's a gross difference in the incidence rates. And you find that over the period of years, for example, from the year 2000, there's been an increasing prevalence of choledochal malformation. Now, whether it is actually there is an increase in prevalence or increase in occurrence of choledochal malformations, or is it because these choledochal malformations which are not initially diagnosed are now being diagnosed with the advent of proper, very highly sensitive imaging techniques? We don't know. And you find that there is a very definite predominance among the female children, and they seem to be more commonly affected than the male children. Is there a syndromic association with choledochal malformations? You find that most of them seem to be isolated and do not have any syndromic associations. With regard to the pathogenesis of choledochal malformations, there are two leading hypotheses. One is the distal stenosis theory. So, like any tubular structure, we know that whenever there's an obstruction in a tubular structure, there will be a proximal dilatation of it. So, whether it is a bowel or whether it is a urinary tract, it is the same. So, it was postulated that possibly there is a stenosis involving the distal end of the common bile duct, resulting in a dilatation of the proximal portions and formation of the so-called choledochal malformations. But you find that while this explains the occurrence of one variety of choledochal malformation, which is the type 1C, it does not seem to explain the occurrence of the other types of choledochal malformations, particularly type 5. So, when does this distal stenosis, when does this occur, was the next question that came up. So, it was then said that possibly this occurs in a fetal period, possibly because of a late vascular accident resulting in a stricture or a narrowing of the distal end of the common bile duct. So, this theory is not very popular, and for obvious reasons, not very popular, and it is now being replaced by another theory called Babbitt's theory. So, Babbitt postulated that there is an associated pancreatic reflux in those children who have choledochal malformation. So, how did he come to this conclusion? So, what he did was he found that when an intraoperative cholangiogram was done in children with choledochal malformations, you found that particularly presence of a long common channel, he found that the bile seemed to reflux into the pancreatic duct. So, then he started thinking, if the bile can reflux into the pancreatic duct, why is it not possible that the pancreatic juices can reflux into the biliary tree as well? So, he postulated that the dilatation of the common bile duct could be because of the action of the pancreatic enzymes, which acts on the wall of the biliary tree, causing thinning of the biliary tree, subsequent dilatation. So while this seems to explain most of the types of choledochal malformations, we find that there are certain points which we need to think about with respect to Babbitt's theory, which are not logically, which suggests that this may not be the only mechanism by which choledochal malformations occur. In King's Institute, popularly known, King's Institute is a very popular institute. So in King's Institute, what was routinely done was that the choledochal pressure in children with choledochal malformations were assessed, and bile amylase levels were assessed as well. And in their study, they found that in those children with very high choledochal pressure, that is the pressure within the cyst, those children with very high choledochal pressure had low amylase levels, bile amylase levels. So it had an inverse relation. And they also found that in those children with very high choledochal pressure, the epithelial changes were much more, and the damage done to the epithelium and to the biliary wall was very high. See, when they tried to correlate all the information that they received, they found that, so if choledochal pressure is high, you find there is more changes occurring within the epithelium and the wall of the biliary tree. So which inversely means that whenever the bile amylase levels are low, there are more changes involving the biliary tree. So which sort of disproves or contradicts Babbitt's theory that the pancreatic reflux is the cause for the thinning of the biliary tree. So what are the most important components which can lead on to the formation, which is said to lead on to the formation of a choledochal malformation, is the presence of a long common pancreaticobiliary channel, or a long common channel as it's called. So a long common channel is noted in more than 90% of cases of choledochal malformation. It is particularly seen in type 1C, 1F and 4 variants of choledochal malformation, but you find that type 2 and type 5. Type 2 is basically a choledochal diverticulum, and type 5 is basically pure intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation. So both of these do not seem to be associated with a long common channel. And they found that this long common channel might be seen in even biliary atresia as well in 50% of cases. So what is this long common channel? So we have been talking about long common channel. So you find that generally the pancreatic duct meets the biliary duct, and in a normal adult or a child, this communication between both these is located within the duodenal wall. You find that it is not always so. In the fetal period, this communication is some distance away from the duodenal, medial wall of the duodenum, and at the time of birth, it seems to get incorporated into the duodenal wall. So any problems involving the incorporation of this pancreaticoduodenal junction into the duodenal wall can result in a long common pancreaticobiliary channel. So what happens when you have a long common pancreaticobiliary channel? It means that the pancreatic and the biliary juices have to travel together for a longer duration to enter into the duodenum, which means that there is a very high chance that any one of these contents can reflex into the other pathway. For example, you can have the reflex of the pancreatic contents into the biliary tree, the biliary contents into the pancreatic tree. And moreover, when you have a long common channel, the chance of obstruction with mucus plugs particularly is very high, resulting in pancreatitis or cholangitis as well. So presence of a common long channel is said to be one of the most important features of a choledochal malformation, and is said to be responsible for most of the complications of choledochal malformations as well.